Eric,
Omar,
how you doing, my man?
I'm feeling all right. I felt
Yeah.
better, but I feel all right.
Yeah, I mean, you got a nice musky quality to your voice, and I just hope the audience appreciates that because I will say this, Eric. I think you have a very good voice, and I'm being sincere when I say that.
Well, I just want to say thank you very much, Omar. I appreciate that.
We're just going down. This is going to be. I actually one time for the other podcast, Mama's Boys. I had just woken up, and I don't know if you could relate to this. When I do, I need to warm up my vocal cords. I also have a lower resting voice. I pitch it up because otherwise it could sound very monotone if I just talk at my resting voice. And everyone said after I did that episode, like, what's wrong with Omar? Like, he was just talking like this. Like, his voice was so. Did he pitch shift himself down? I was like, no, dude. That's like when I just wake up and don't give a fuck, and I'm just talking. That's me. But you have a great quality to it because I will revert to like a monotone when my voice is lower, unfortunately, which isn't dynamic or engaging.
Yeah, I just got a little lingering congestion. It really has nothing to do with anything intentional. So
Eric, I'm saying just keep it up. I'm feeling it.
Done.
I know. I got look at these big. If you're on the video, the big old ear cans that I got on my head. Like I'm partaking in this, my friend.
All right. Well, yeah, I'll just make sure that and when I start to feel better, I'm going to seek out and find someone sick, which should be quite easy these days. And
Yeah.
I'm going to stay in a perpetual state of having some cardiorespiratory disease, which will be great. Yeah.
Yeah, terrible for your training, great for your aspiring career as either a shock jock, radio DJ, reading your advertisements for it doesn't matter what, but it's coming, it's happening.
Like a sultry "Let's get ready to rumble" guy. Like,
Wow.
let's get ready to rumble.
Eric, bro,
Yeah.
So the guy that does movie theater like previews where it's like they said it couldn't be done, like the same guy. He needs to go because honestly, it's theatrical in a terrible way. What you just did, you said sultry and you turned it up to 10. I'm feeling it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. And I will dive in right to this because I know we have a Q&A. And Eric, I took a brief look at the questions, and it was on fire. We asked the TikTokers, and people okay, TikTok folks are underrated because we make jokes. All they do are dances. What is this platform even for? Is there any utility here? When everyone hears the questions for this Q&A, they will be astounded. They'll be in a state of disbelief. Before we go on, though, Eric, I do want to give a shout out to the cult because they are leaving some truly stupendous comments. The last one that we did, which I think is an underrated episode, I'm just judging it by downloads. I firmly believe it's a top 10 episode of all time on autoregulation and individualization. We got a lot of great comments. The hardcore people turned out. But you'll like this. I don't know if you read the comments, Eric. Someone said, Matthew Rodriguez said, I failed one squat and got existential nihilism as well. And he spelled it Knee.
Yeah, and I think that is a subtle shot at the way I pronounce nihilism.
No.
It is. And I just want to point out that while everyone says it nihilism, the root of that word is Latin and it is nihil. So, you know what? Y'all just need to let me speak properly, okay? And y'all just need to get some education on how to say things.
No, Eric, let me die on the same sword as you. And Eric's like, Omar, that's not a sword. What are you doing? My philosophy teacher, who also was a linguistics guy, said nihilism as well, the derivative, the derivation, which is Latin. But here is the rub that is absolutely the truth. And I know, I think that guy was just joking around. But English is such a nebulous language. If you actually examine the grammatical rules, the syntax, everything that goes into our common vernacular, it really is up to your interpretation how you want to say many different words. And nihilism, I am totally comfortable. As soon as it's episode 3, we first unveiled it. As like Eric said, I'm like, I'm saying nihilism too. Like, why not?
Do you know how you identify an actual nihilist?
They don't care.
They just switch it up every time. They just say whatever they want. They call it nihilism. They call it nihilism. It doesn't matter. So know, if you ever hear me say nihilism and not in the way I just did to describe the way I would never say it,
right?
Then you know I've actually succumbed to nihilism.
Oh no, damn! So everyone, please pray to whatever God you pray to that Eric keeps saying nihilism. As soon as we hear that switch up,
got problems.
Yeah, we
have no problems because nothing matters.
Because Nothing actually matters. Two other people, Philip S. says, it's not an Iron Culture episode unless Omar says, Eric, this is a monster episode. Which
we've got 160 of those actually.
Yeah, it's a we gotta do a compilation monster. But that the underlying theme there is that genuinely, and I can speak quite candidly, over the last 6 to 8 months, I've been reinvigorated with the cult for several reasons, just like my training, a lot of things that in and outside
of it. Cocaine's a hell of a drug.
You know, and so doing the podcast, and when we talk about the episodes beforehand, there is this excitement again 3 years on. And I don't know if I'm the only one in this relationship that's feeling the honeymoon phase again. Eric's like, Omar, this is it, bro.
I never left it.
Oh, you never? Okay.
Never
so
left
I was the person just like dilly-dallying another way. And then I came back. I didn't know what I had until I came back to it.
Hey, that's okay. I never strayed, but I knew you would, and I knew you'd come back. So it all worked out.
And then, go.
No, I would just say I would love to see a compilation of each one of your episode starts, because each time it's the hands coming together and you're going, or just saying my name. So it'd be like, Eric. That would be amazing. I would be so happy to see that.
So Eric, we have our producer, shout out to Brandon Wells, B-dubs. He is a fellow musician. Someone who has too much time on their hands can absolutely make the sickest of beats with the intro, and then you could spit some rhymes over it. I know it can happen. I'm just throwing it out there because, hey, 30,000 of you, what's the probability that someone is willing to take that time investment and will do it? It's higher than you think, Eric.
You know what? That's the main benefit of having an ever-growing audience, is that you can say random, stupid internet memes that you want to see, and just by sheer probabilistic chance, someone is probably going to do it. Yeah. And if it doesn't happen, I will probably shift over to nihilism, because that means that no one cares enough. So
nihilism, because as soon as you say that,
if I got there, you'd know that's what I'd say, but I'm not there yet. So,
hey, Eric, and this is the last comment, because we appreciate a lot of the comments that people will leave. This is perhaps my favorite from the last episode. Hellbilly Storm said, I don't know if you read this one, Eric. So about autoregulation and individualization. He said, a wonderful episode that opened my eyes to many other ways to go about autoregulation. But I was deeply disappointed when Eric peddled clear lies at an hour 20 minutes in, when he claims only you inhabit your body, in quotations, when we have definite evidence in the form of the 2018 documentary Hereditary that in at least 2 instances, it is in fact our Lord and King Paimon that inhabits the body. Please add a correction for this fallacy, otherwise absolute gold. Love the podcast. Come on, that's a deep comment right there. Got to give a shout out.
It's a deep cut, yeah, and I think an even deeper cut is when you have to remove the person's head, and then they're only inhabited by Paimon. So no, big shout out, correct comment. We stand corrected, and now we will have to correct the record so that correction never happened, and we remain upon the top of the pyramid. So yeah.
Eric, it gets hard to keep up with our mythology, but luckily we don't have to, because it's just the rule and law. With that being said, we have done our we're almost at the 10-minute mark. We're actually obligated, okay, by
contractually.
Our corporate overlords. We have
yes. Yeah, I was going to say someone else.
Oh,
yeah, that works.
Please don't. I don't want to die. I like my head very much.
Yeah, that makes a podcast very difficult to not have a head. Yeah.
Now, we do have these questions, and I do want to hop into them. We'll see how many we get to. Eric, there are literally dozens, so maybe we'll make this a 3-hour episode. We'll see. But can I open up with one of the questions? I know we have access to both of them.
Actually, you know what? I have seen our colleagues in Wanting to Be Us, the Stronger by Science podcast. They have started not only for one, now they're coming out weekly, derivative, but 2, they have decided that they want to keep their podcast shorter and not go over the hour mark, because they previously went too long. So it's like, come on, guys. Like,
so they're doing less effort. All I interpreted from that is they want to show more of their Macro Factor. So was Macro Factor guy back on an episode? Was he hosting it again? I forget his name. Does he have a name anymore?
He's actually the primary host, and then they have a different guest host each time. So technically, they don't even have a corporate sponsor. They have a corporate host. Damn. Macro Factor hosts the Stronger by Science podcast, and then occasionally they let Greg Knuckles on to speak, who, oh my God, guess what? also is a co-owner of Macrofactor. So it's basically like they've decided, okay, we're going to give it to you weekly, but to show that we're super unbiased, we're not going to have 2 hours of advertising, just one. So I'm just pretty unimpressed at this point with those folks. So anyway.
Oh man, Eric, there's so much. I will, because people are like, Omar, there's too much banter. Like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm trying to get to the question now. I'm trying to fulfill.
This is Eric derailing it with sarcasm about Stronger by Science. Yeah.
And Eric, what people don't know actually, in terms of cynicism, sarcasm, and just genuinely being funny, people know from the podcast. But like I like, you're the straight guy on this podcast, but you're actually hilarious. And the amount of shit that we talk amongst each other offline, Eric dishes it out, man. Let me just say.
I don't know what you're talking about. I don't dial it down for the podcast at all.
This is professional Helms, Homer. Come on, man. So I'm gonna hop into this though, because otherwise Tommy TikTok from the TikTok Nation. Wow, this is like a paragraph. I'm surprised he's able. So he was dancing while he asked the question. But let me just summarize it real quick. He said, there's been a trend to focus on behaviors and processes versus the outcome in order to try and enhance sustainability for most practitioners. But are there certain times and places where perhaps it is better to focus on the outcome instead?
That's actually a really good question. So,
Tommy, thank you.
Yes, Tommy. I love that we're getting questions through TikTok now, which is great. I don't know.
We don't even have a TikTok.
I don't know how we're getting the questions. That's the best part. I just like interpretive dance through the ether. This is amazing. Might as well be made up questions, but we wouldn't do that. So anyway, this question from Tommy is a really good one, because I think generally there has been such a focus on kind of the old adage of, if you can measure it, you can manage it, and that this applies to personal training. And, we've talked about the potential problem of SMART goals in previous episodes, and how that actually came from business management and was kind of shoehorned into personal training, and why the A and the R in SMART goals are often synonyms. Like, is this something that's acceptable and realistic? Like, what's the difference there? And that's because it used to be assignable when it came from business management. And it was literally like, here's how you help your sales team hit sales targets. So you have objective, external outcome goals. And we found that, generally the best way to help someone achieve a sustainable lifestyle, which is a continuous goal and is more process oriented, and you get the benefits of the outcomes, is, unsurprisingly, when you think about it, to focus on the processes, right? And it can actually be harmful in some cases, and certain circumstances, to, get people to just focus on the outcomes, because then once they get there, they may not know what to do, or they may not have the same motivation. And I would say this is a small part, and definitely not all of it, of why the obesity epidemic is still happening. And despite the fact that we see so many people attempt to lose weight, but are unsuccessful at maintaining said weight loss. I've seen some data that would suggest that of the people who have sought intentional weight loss to lose at least, say, 5 kilos, over the last 10 years, about 70% of them have actually gained weight. They've increased their body mass by 5% or more. And in fact, the intention to lose weight predicts future weight gain, just correlationally. And that's in people who are not seeking help. So that's scary. And this is kind of goes back to the episodes we had with Dr. Ben House and also Gabrielle Fendero. And that changes if you get multidisciplinary care, and people also focusing on like acceptance-based therapy, which is about like, here's where I'm at, folks, and also focusing on the process and the behaviors. Now all of a sudden you can see people who have lost weight. Now like 50% of them are maintaining, 5% of their weight loss, not gaining 5% or more of their body weight afterwards. So I think this whole paradigm makes a lot of sense, that it is good to focus on behaviors when you have a goal that you must sustain. When sustainability is the focus, that's absolutely 100% it. But there are a lot of goals in fitness and in sport especially that shouldn't be sustained, like staying shredded after a show, right? Or trying to stay at your peak strength from say worlds or nationals, at whatever the highest level you compete at as a power lifter long term, and expecting that to be a good thing. The kind of the myth that it is, while it may when you're a novice, but that as a high level strength athlete, it's just always this upward trend that sometimes plateaus. So you're not losing strength, but it's just an upward trend when actually it goes up and down, which we've talked about many times. So I think in those cases, there is a time and a place to focus on specific outcomes, because sometimes for high level athletes or experienced lifters, you need something objective to hang your hat on to know whether or not something you planned worked, right? So a 1RM is a external goal, and there's nothing wrong with setting it or at least tracking it, but I think there's a way to do it properly. So for example, if you have the goal to squat 500 pounds, the issue is that's an external goal no matter how you dice it, right? However, there are ways to do it that set you up for success or failure. And one of the things which I would think would set you up for failure, in my experience, has, and by failure, I don't mean not hitting 500, but just potentially losing motivation or being frustrated by the process of getting there, whether you get there or not, is setting an incorrect timeline, right? Having unrealistic expectations about what you will have to do to get there, or how long it will take, or both. However, just simply setting a 500-pound goal, if it's realistic, which is a difficult thing to parse, don't get me wrong, could be very motivating, right? Or setting the goal to compete at nationals. You can find numerous athletes who will explain that really does kick their training into a high gear, and it's something they can call upon when they might be otherwise rationalizing, going a little bit easier on a workout, etc. But that's tough because sometimes you should be going, a little easier or pulling back. So I think it is certainly, we should certainly acknowledge that an external focus is a potential fuel to put in your fuel tank. We just need to also acknowledge that it's a potentially caustic fuel, and that there are ways to use that fuel that are more likely to make it burn a hole in your fuel tank than others. Like, for example, an inappropriate timeline to get to the same objective external goal that you might have at another time. Like when I get on stage, I do have an idea of my stage weight. Like, as someone who's been competing as long as I have, I'd love to get on stage a little bit heavier the next time. But what do I often set my timeline based upon? Well, my last season's stage weight, because I know that's going to be the best data I have. It's not the perfect data, but it's the best data I have to have an idea of how much weight do I have to lose, and then I can think about historically how much time has that taken, and then I can look at my calendar and I can go, okay, well, when am I traveling? When do I have a lot of work going on, et cetera, et cetera? Where are the shows? And then how do I manage all that together? If I don't have that and I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to focus on progressing and making progress and being good to go, it's also quite, like making sure that I'm doing the things that should help me become a good competitive bodybuilder. It's a little more difficult to really push through those hard times and be like, look, I'm 8 weeks out. Like, it's go time, baby. Like, I just have to get this done. Like, things haven't gone perfectly, but, ultimately I've committed to the show. And sometimes the right answer, though, like I said, though, and here's an example of how you have to know how to use this fuel. Sometimes the right answer is to not do that first show because something wasn't right about that best prior data to inform, this year. So I think that's a general overview on where I'd want to start. But Omar, I know you are someone who I've watched really focus on behaviors and has actually locked down some really impressive, like what seemingly permanent changes to your physique. Like you've been able to, and also you've had challenges. Like obviously, for one, we've all been dealing with a global pandemic. You lost the original dates and plans of you to actually compete in strongman for the first time. You've had some injuries. However, because you established so many locked in behaviors, you've actually accomplished many physique goals. At least maybe not like I've continuously added muscle, but you've been able to sustain a physique that I think is you're very proud of, and that shows your collective body of work for like 3 years now, Yeah. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, given that.
Eric, first off, what a monster start. People say monster episode. What a monster start there where you overviewed it. I think you're completely correct in the sense that for lifelong lifters, and I do make that designation because those listening to the cult, likely you are a lifelong lifter, you have to know what hat to put on. And just before I dive into answering exactly what you put out, I had a bit of that. I had a bit of that epiphany, Eric, that sometimes some of the loudest voices in any area disproportionately represent a particular opinion or stance, meaning that if you're competing at the very highest level, it doesn't matter if you're a powerlifter or a bodybuilder, you're probably, it's not that you're more outcome oriented, so you care about the results, but I mean your evaluation, the focus of the journey is that metric at the end of it. So winning the championships, either the like Jordan Cup or IPF Worlds, doesn't really matter. And because these are the most prominent voices, those achieving the highest level, that's why there's kind of that understanding, I think, between you and myself, you being a coach. I mean, just like on the ground, they're dealing with actual lifters. That's like, let's be realistic. And this isn't, I hate when people think that either, to your point, Eric, being process oriented, you're just freewheeling it. Like you have no like major overarching goals. Like basically you've given up, or like the idea where we said moderation, they associate with mediocrity, which is simply not true. But if we're being realistic, there's that middle ground of people that fall into the category where, you know, they want to achieve those objective metrics, and that is a part of their identity. But also at the same time, if they manage to incorporate some of those behaviors or lifelong patterns, they'll probably derive more overall enjoyment in the journey and stick around longer. And we just know that like it takes a decade, 2 decades like combined of lifting to have some of those epiphanies. So that's why we're talking, I think, from our perspective. And for myself, speaking about different hats, I think one of the things, and I don't know if I mentioned this on this podcast, man, is that I had to partially give up the identity of Omar being a strength-oriented individual in the big three. And I think as soon as I gave that up, I had that conversation with you. And we even, like, that's why we had the last episode on auto-regulation and individualization, where I said before, I think for myself, to get stronger, to maximize my strength potential, I train in a particular style. To maximize hypertrophy, I train in a different style. I had been doing the same thing for a long enough period of time. I had already derived a decent amount of satisfaction from my strength goals. And then one of the major hurdles for myself, Eric, which I told you before we spoke about that sustainable nutrition paradigm of taking some dietary breaks in 2019 and just incorporating other strategies, is that I did find it demotivating. And so there's the conscious awareness of not being as motivated in the gym. So when my strength would go down, let's say I'm in a fat loss phase, I'm in week 8 or 9, and yeah, relative strength is maintaining, but I do think I try and calculate things in weeks and months. I'm like, okay, so the 16-week phase, my strength is going to take a hit. Then it's going to take me, let's just estimate here, 10 to 12 weeks until I'm able to gain back my strength. Well, then I'm actually really losing from quality strength training about 20 weeks. And so I'd always do that song and dance where I lose a little bit of weight, and my resting weight was, I was a higher body fat level. And then I wouldn't compromise to the point that I noticed any degradation in the quality of the lifting, but I would never then accomplish the physique goals because they were a little bit different. And I think that is one of the potentially intermediate mistakes, assuming you can have your cake and eat it too always. Like you're like looking very good and also you're at your maximum strength level, which is simply depending upon your evaluation of yourself and your specific goals might not be there. So 2019, it was when I became less attached to the actual physique and more just getting into that flow state of here's what I need to do. So some of the basics. I was quite sedentary when I was leaner earlier on in my career, Eric. You know, I was a trainer and I bought one of those pedometers. I was that guy and I was taking 16,000 steps. Anyways, it's like, what can I do that would be the path of least resistance? Because I think the most hardcore thing you could do, and Eric and myself were gamers, is to try and gamify anything, because it's the process of trying to maximize an expression of anything that you're doing with the least amount of effort. Why do I want to make something harder? I only have a finite amount of energy and resources. So I want to try and maximize them to get the attributes as high as possible, as opposed to shooting myself in the foot and being like, that's hardcore. Now let's drag across the finish line. I'm like, actually, I finished like 30% slower than I could have if I just optimized everything. So I realized there's some limitations. And I think the big one for me mentally to get committed was first the identity of who I was. And the one that I would say is kind of tied to my body weight, less to everything else, would be actually my bench press. And so as I de-emphasized that one, and I allowed, because I did have that goal, I did want to bench 405. And I think a lifetime, like it's certainly possible, but like, you know, that was one of the check marks all time, Eric, like on the list, like kind of 500, 600, 400 was in my head, to be honest. And that was like part of my hardcore identity that unless I achieved it, you know, I kind of wasn't achieving my goals. So I had to give that up. And then from there, I took a look at everything that I was doing And what were the things, like those stones that I could turn over that would be easier, that wouldn't cause mental duress? Because I think the more you think about something and the more that you expend that mental energy to commit to it, and then it becomes like a battle, like, ooh, should I eat this? Should I not eat this? How can I organize it? So I think from speaking with you, it opened up that doorway. So it opened up that framework of how do I structure this? And that's where like dietary breaks and everything else began that journey of looking over and resetting everything and just questioning initial assumptions like training style, nutritional habits that I'd follow, nutritional preferences, recovery methods, even like in terms of the frequency of training. Just real quick, and I'll wrap up here, man. But one of the other revelations that I had, I kind of was in that Yngwie Malmsteen, that neoclassical metal shredder, where it's like more is more. I was training like 5 minimum, more like 6 days a week. But again, that quality of the 6th day, when you take a look at the overall impact on my training, was actually pretty low. And so it was the ability to take a look at everything and say, how can I get to a place where it's kind of on cruise control? I know the transformation is going to be happening, but I actually can enjoy also the day to day, so that my mental commitment when I enter the gym and I try and apply myself, as we spoke about, Eric, airplane mode, game face on, we're here to train, I could get that back. Because let's be honest, if I'm able to train with a high quality, the rest kind of takes care of itself. Like when you're trying to micromanage everything, like you want like, oh, Eric, like, if I 20 grams over my protein, like what's going to happen? That neuroticism actually could be your downfall, as opposed to what are the big picture items? What are the biggest levers here?
That's a great answer. And I think you really covered a lot of good topics there, and also put your personal experience on it. I don't have a whole lot more to add, just 2 things that I think kind of, and we're getting a little, I don't know, we're still on topic. Like I'm thinking this is more about goal setting and conceptualizing it. But ultimately, the question was about, external versus internal motivation and goals, right? So I think the question almost is making a false dichotomy, for one.
Yeah.
And I think maybe a better framing of it that kind of goes in line with goal setting research, which I'm not an expert on, but I've read enough to feel like I can give a general overview that's not wrong. You can actually position internal and external focuses, or process versus outcomes, as things that work together. So for example, having one of those external goals might be a big picture kind of long-term goal. And earlier I said squat 500 pounds. I would say even better than, and then I made that sound like it was better than I want to squat 500 pounds in two months. But I think even better than both of those was I want to squat the most I'm capable of. Right? And I think that's a really good external goal, but maybe that's not everything you hang your hat on. Maybe then you think about, well, what are my values? And you'll attach that goal to that. Like I want to be the best I can be in the things that I'm interested in. And that's who I want to, how I want to see myself and who I want to be in this world. So that's the value. And then what you hang on that is that external goal of I want to squat the most I possibly can. And then what you hang on that is, okay, well, what do I need to do to get to that long-term goal? Those subordinate goals would basically be the processes, right? So those would be all those process-oriented things, like, well, I'm going to, try to regularly eat protein at every meal. And you keep just breaking these things down into smaller and smaller categories. So you can have external goals that are built on a why, that is an internal value, and then those are, supported by process-oriented goals that get you there, or processes that get you to that external goal. So it's not really, which one's better, or is it internal versus external motivation or goal setting or what have you. Really, it's how do we create an ecosystem where these things all work in support of one another. And I think that's when you really start to get the juice. And you'll probably find, if you look at your own life, think of things, anyone who's listening, things that you've done successfully and gotten better at over the long term, you'll probably find you have naturally selected that type of ecosystem. Like, for example, a lot of athletes who excel in a sport and keep excelling and playing it, they started it, they liked it, and they were good at it, and they started liking it more because they were rewarded by being good at it, and they maintained the behaviors that helped them become good at it, and so those became habits that they did and they valued, right? And then their identity as that athlete became stronger, and okay, that's how I see myself, and now I have values attached to that identity. So it wasn't all necessarily pre-planned out in front of them, but they stumbled into something, this success, that had to do with a combination of processes, outcomes, and internal and external goals, and various ways of looking at things. So I think you can, for those things you stumbled into your life, dear listener, try to re-engineer that for your lifting goals if you don't already have it in that manner, and you might find some new success or greater ease while you try to push towards success.
Eric, first, straight fire. I love what you said about value, because I think a lot of people, you encapsulated what people can identify about themselves and how they see themselves, and then how they organize from there. That's like the central core tenet. And then also the word that I love that you used, because I would agree wholeheartedly with it, where you brought up the example of the athlete, stumble. Because I do think we tend to have this narrative fallacy, just as humans, where we think it's a directed conscious aim of everything that we're doing has led to a certain position, as opposed to like, man, let's be honest. If we were to give a more objective evaluation of our lifting career, stumbled into it, kind of did, like my brother was doing it, I decided to do it. I want to do something a little physically active. It took a long time as I got more invested in it to try and neatly define goals. And as you said, there was a core value of myself, of how I wanted to see myself. And it springboarded to different things. I joined a gym. I decided to join that gym first off, not because it's a powerlifting gym, Fortis Fitness. I joined it because it was an independent gym and I knew I could train how I wanted. And there wasn't, Eric, we spoke about being personal trainers before, just that corporate structure overhead. So it wasn't this directed aim of like, okay, I'm now in my early 20s. I want to train more seriously. I'm going to be doing a powerlifting or like whatever. It didn't happen that way. There's a lot of, I love when you said stumbling, because it does remind me, it's like you're presented certain opportunities and like branching paths in life. And it's what you derive from that experience. And then it determines like your next step, as opposed to the aim of like, I started at whatever, the age of like 17 training. It's like, I'm going to be a bodybuilding. It doesn't work. Like, I think, and I would say if people jump the gun early, there's a great Rousseau quote that I'm not about child prodigies that I'm not going to completely lampoon here and get incorrect. But I will say that the concept, I think if you're too early in your estimation of your goals before you really know yourself or know what you're participating in, it could almost be your downfall, because you don't even know yourself enough to determine if that's truly a goal of yours, if this is like a superficial, like just initial aim that you haven't even had enough experience before to determine, is this really you?
Can I give an example?
Go.
So when I first got into track and field as a freshman in high school, I wanted to be a 100-meter sprinter. And that was because I thought that was cool. This was in it was in the late 90s. So like there were some popular track and field figures at that time. It was more explosive. It was fast. It was more flashy. So for one right there, was that a superficial desire? Was I actually drawn to the idea of sprinting? Right. Mm-hmm. And then I did the 100-meter and I was just too slow. Right. So that made me feel downtrodden. And then I was like, oh, I can't be the thing that I wanted my identity to be. And then the coaches just tried me out at different races and they found, oh, he's actually good at kind of like long distance sprints, like the 400. And I wouldn't do the 800 because the 400 felt terrible and I didn't want to do two of those in a row. So I did the 400 and I did it for all 4 years in track because I was okay with adopting an identity of that because I was good at it, but I hated it no more. Like I did not like the 400 meters. It took a lot out of me and I was nervous about it. And I was just good enough to where I had like relatedness and some rewards. I got to be on like the 4x4 team and stuff like that with 3 really talented 400 meter sprinters. And, but as soon as I got out of high school, I'm done. Right. So like, if we look at, okay, well, what would have, like, if I could be transported back into my body, the reaction I would have had to being slow at the 100 meters, if that had not been a superficial goal, which I don't even know if it was, would have been, all right, let me get into some sprint training, adjust my diet, and do everything I can to improve. Because I'm not perfectly built to be a bodybuilder or a powerlifter, but I've put in, almost 20 years of effort into it, right?
Yeah.
And that's because of the changes I've made, because I didn't get into it too early. And, I didn't have immediate success, so I didn't get that reward, and I didn't stick with it. That would have been very different today, So that's one huge difference, if it was truly something I desired. But I was 14, so how would I even know what I desired or have the life experiences to have that self-efficacy to keep pushing to do it? So, and I probably also wouldn't have stuck with the 400 meters. I'm like, no, I hate this and I don't like it. Like, I'm going to go do something else. So I think it just kind of goes to show you that happens a lot, what you were talking about, Omar. And it's really important to be able to assess where you're at, honestly, and without judgment. So you can set yourself up for success rather than kind of putting yourself in a position where you have to do something else. But of course, you do have to build that initial self-efficacy, and you have to figure out why you actually care about something to have the motivation to build that self-efficacy in the first place. So, yeah.
Eric, so Tommy the TikToker, thank you so much for that question. It was a great question. I was interpreting the question mainly from a dance. I do think I conveyed it correctly. If I didn't, I'm sure I'll be hearing, well, not hearing, but seeing the dance response.
I love it. So I also have a question, Omar, and I got one for, nice. I think that is well suited to you.
Okay.
And this was also from TikTok, which I'm no, I swear to God. Yeah.
Damn.
So, yeah, this was done with a real, there was dancing in it, which really had nothing to do with the question. And they had that female robot voice read out the question, which everyone uses, which I don't understand why. And I didn't want to listen to it or watch it. And I think people just need to stop using it, but it was used. It was a great question.
Sure.
So nonetheless, this is from Tanya.
Tanya.
So, and it's very eloquent. So, influencers or influenzas, as you like to call them, often use confident speech, controversy, a position of authority based on their achievements or appearance, and then use that to leverage or sell anecdotal or sometimes harmful information or products. That's the start.
This is a fire question like that.
Is good.
I agree. Yes.
Yeah. That's all they said. No, I'm just kidding. And then what they say is, I've seen trends of quote unquote evidence-based practitioners using similar tactics, just replacing achievements and appearance with degrees and the superiority of science as a way of figuring things out. Is this worth it, or does it teach poor critical thinking? Tanya.
So,
Tanya.
Eric, I know that robot voice. And if you start to see, Eric, you're a very logical individual. If you start exploring where it's like, there's no good reason behind this. It's literally the lowest hanging fruit, why people are using it and it became a trend, thus everyone else uses it. There's no inherent value to using this female robotic voice. You'll go mad. If you try and actually analyze TikTok, Eric, don't. That's how you get nihilism.
I actually respect Tanya even more because she probably asked such a clearly well thought out question using the female robotic voice just for pure irony. So mad respect.
Oh, now that is next level. So first off, truly fantastic question. The short answer, I would agree that for the audience that is listening, that it wouldn't enhance their critical thinking skills if they're using essentially some of the evidence-based practitioners, the same marketing tools, the same tactics in order to convey information. It just so happens that they're conveying the correct information. This is an interesting conversation to be had, and I will cite my boy, Joffrey Nipples, because we do talk about this, and I did make the joke, Eric, with him, because we were talking about someone who will remain anonymous, and Jeff did say, net positive, and we have both said that exact same phrase before, and what that actual translation to, when you start talking about someone, and you say, net positive, it means they're a piece of shit, but like they do some solid things that like you're trying to justify it. And so you're doing like, there's an abacus going on in your head where there's a sliding scale and you're weighing different values. It's like when you have to start, it's like, it's like, hey, Eric, is that guy your friend? It's like, and someone responds, well, he's an acquaintance. It's like, what does that mean? It's like, he means he's not your friend. I think it's like this. I think one analogy I could use at high school, because I'm thinking of TikTok, some of the evidence-based practitioners, it reminds me of the nerdy kid observing what a popular individual is doing and mimicking it entirely, but also not understanding what it is that people respect potentially about the person that is popular. So it could be like a laissez-faire attitude, a certain coolness and independence or whatnot, but they think it's like the dress, or it's like the mannerisms, it's some of these things. And Tanya's completely correct. I think that in general, in the public sphere, being a confident speaker, you could be a confident, shallow speaker, but it's not the depth of your conversation. It is the confidence with which you convey your information that will largely determine for the masses, whether they believe you or not. I think to answer a question, it doesn't teach critical thinking. I think and I could definitely dive into that, but I think the meta conversation, Eric, to be had does that always matter? And I do think there's different buckets of people in the lifting community overall. And if we take yourself as a perfect example, as a stud, someone who has a lot of that charisma, that rare ability to entice people, what you actually do, and let me flip it back on you here for a second, is that what you're able to do, people that wouldn't normally listen to the type of content you want to talk about, if they're to be caught in the snare of good critical thinking, Eric is the chief proselytizer, okay? He is John the Baptist in the wilderness. He's catching fools that don't even know they're getting caught. And so they get swept up, kind of like the kid, where we say stumbling, into something much greater. And that's why Eric, why I agreed, first off, with Iron Culture, where we did it. Eric is someone that I'm ideologically aligned with, which means his core values, I don't even have to, like, there's nothing Eric could throw at me in terms of any proposition that I ever have to question his character. I fundamentally know Eric to that core, and he is just that person. And he has a great statuesque physique. And I have to throw that in there because Eric, I'm not obligated to, but it's one of my personal preferences. With that being said, there is a certain finite audience for different styles, because I think if we're talking about, and when we say critical thinking, this phrase, it means that you're not just listening and then parroting the information. You're learning to digest it, to process it, to think about it independently, and then come up with your own conclusion. Not that when it comes to like science or like a study, it's like, let me hear your interpretation. I'm not saying that whatsoever, but for your own ability to listen to it and process it rather than just listening to a guru and obeying them, implicitly. I do think that is.
Can I give a really good, quick example of that?
Go. Yeah.
I was listening to Sigma Nutrition a little while ago.
Yep.
And no jokes will be made right now because it was a really good episode. And they were talking about how some of the pseudoscience and quackery that's come out recently around cholesterol, just how it's almost inverted to having high cholesterol is good because of, look at all the things that cholesterol does in the body, which you could literally say about anything in the diet that is a vitamin, mineral, or whatever. And they were playing clips of just to show how hyperbolic it had become. And there was a clip of this person saying that high cholesterol levels, and very confidently, and I was listening to it and I was like, interesting, I'd like to see that study. And I was like, wait a minute, no, there's no study. This is bullshit. Like just the speech patterns and everything had me like listening and thinking about it, and it just sounded legit. But what they said was crazy. They had said that higher cholesterol levels had been linked to like homicidal behavior. And I was like, and when I thought about it for more than 3 seconds, I was like, there is no way to measure that. It has not been measured. This study doesn't exist. This person completely made that up. But you wouldn't expect someone to make that claim without having some evidence. They had the confidence. They were positioned as an expert, and they said it in a manner that made it sound like they were referring to a very specific study, And it was also within a list of a bunch of other, maybe a little less crazy claims, like it's been linked to health issue, depression, as well as and murder, basically. and it was just wild because they're like, I had a moment where I was like, I'd love to see that study because it sounded true,
Yeah.
But it was not. So anyway, go ahead.
No, Eric. But I think that's such a valuable point because one, you have the critical thinking, and then for each topic, knowledge is incredibly domain specific. So it doesn't, like we're talking like climate science, like it doesn't matter. But do you have the time and the capacity to become an expert in every single field? No, it's impossible. But I think to counter what I would say, ultimately, the evidence-based practitioners, they're using the same tactics. So it's a superficial reading of the information, but it's applied in a way that's kind of, it's sensational, it's intriguing, it's sexy. People will click on it. They'll walk away with the right information, but they're none the better inherently on a deeper, more fundamental level. I think it's a little complex. And what I would say, I am going to use an ancient war analogy because my boy Hannibal Barca, I got to use it. I'm obligated from the History Channel, ancient war counts, and there is a point to this. But the Carthaginians, when they're facing off against the Romans during the Second Punic War, there's different components to any military, to any army composition, and I would say the hardcore people like Eric right here. He's a general on horseback. Okay, he's part of the cavalry arm. He's a central planner here that shifts the total tide of the war. So you need those top level planners. At the same time, then you either have the veteran infantrymen or other people, the Numidian cavalry for Hannibal, that were strong arms. So other people, so like you can include me or like the Nipples or whoever else, like other people that are core parts of that same nexus. Okay, But then in any army, which is interesting, and Hannibal used this astonishingly effectively, would be the mercenaries, the Gaelic warriors, the Iberian infantrymen that he hired, mercantile exchange. So they were chasing clout, kind of like the evidence-based practitioners, and they were used in a very pragmatic way to be at the forefront of any invasion so that they would take the most amount of casualties, and so they would have to pay them less, but also because they would be the ones most likely to forfeit their position. So you thrust them at the center line. So they're at the center line of the exchange of this, like let's say the war of the evidence-based space. And when I say they're expendable, I don't mean this in an offensive way. I mean it in a very practical term, because I think what we have in the fitness community right now, we have an open society, which I think is very important. So there's a free exchange of ideas. And once if we agree there's a free exchange of ideas and we don't just have gurus at the top that whatever they say, it's absolutely correct, like you can't question it, then over time, those people that maybe need to be brought to justice. So let's say, I think the danger of what we're trying to investigate here is not only the critical thinking, Eric, people walking away and really none the better on a more fundamental level, but also that some of these people, because they do become talking heads, that they might be runaway individuals with their own ideas and thoughts, and they might try and parrot or claim that they're using their, worshiping at the altar of science, but it's one, for their own benefit, or two, there's that theoretical point, Eric, which I'm sure you could agree, and I'll just stop here for a second, that some of the people in the space have then sold out. And what do we mean when we say sell out? They've actually exchanged their credibility. So either falsification, I don't know how we want to deep we want to go here, falsification of data, but basically it wasn't in the service of something greater than themselves. So it wasn't in the service of the public good or the integrity of science. It was self-serving. And I think what we're identifying within Tanya's question is that because the directed aim of the person is it's like clout, monetary compensation, and using science as the leverage to achieve that, it's not one of the core principal values. It's correct, like the information they're sharing, but it's not like being correct is the most important thing. That almighty dollar is, and if it comes time to dance for those dollars, there might be a different conversation then to be had.
No, yeah, I think that's a really good distinction, and I would actually put that in a whole different bucket than I think what the original question was getting at. That sure. If we can say that the person is using science that is accurate enough, but to just purely sell you something, with no concern for education, and it is just for their own clout, and they are not someone who is actually aligned with the philosophy that underpins science, of trying to seek knowledge and therefore help others do that, then we can just chuck them right in that other same bucket. It's honestly like they will eventually not give you the full picture of the science to serve their own interests, because if they're not aligned with science, they're not just going to change whatever product or service they're selling to fit it. They're going to maintain whatever service or product is best for them, and then they will share with you only the science that supports it. Or they will, like you said, manipulate the science if they're in a position to do so, which we have seen. So those people, I would say, they're actually worse than the other folks who are just using anecdote or appearance. Like that's just typical fitness stuff, and a lot of the times they don't even know better, right? They're not someone who knows anything about science. They learned from bros. It worked for them, and now they're just trying to make their way in the fitness industry, and they probably think they're helping people. But if someone is actively leveraging, science in a way like the way I described earlier, that actively, like when it goes bad for that person, it also goes bad for science, because a lot of the people who become disillusioned, and these people always burn themselves out, they also become disillusioned with what the message they were selling, which is intertwined with science. So I think, that I don't think that's what Tanya was asking me. That's terrible. That's bad, and that's worse than just your average bro influenza. I think the interesting question is, what about the person who really does align themselves with science, but does everything else that the influencers do? Sure. And that's a tough one. I think for one, they're gonna self-correct their information. They're not gonna be wrong most of the time. Like if they're staying up to date with the research, they might really want to be right. But to be right, that means to be truly correct. That means you have to update your beliefs over time, right? You may not go out of your way to correct the record of times when you were wrong in the past or whatever, and it might
that shows weakness, Eric.
You're right. So you might kind of like, you might put out a new post and you're like, wait, that contradicts something he said in 2013, and your followers might scratch their head at that. But you're still putting out the correct information and you're up to date. So the information itself is maybe similar to something I'd put out as an example, but you are still positioning yourself as that loud voice, and you're using that same confidence that could be convincing people cholesterol causes murder, or sorry, low cholesterol makes you murder people. So really, really, what is the difference? I would agree with you, Omar, that it's not going to build people's critical thinking up.
Yeah.
But I also think that they're going to be co-opting the audience of many of those other bros. Sure. And maybe sometimes for the first time, exposing them to the idea of science. And when you do that, you're going to start being interested in that more generally. You're going to look at other people like that. People don't typically just follow one influencer. They kind of scope out a section of the fitness industry. So I think when you come across one of these, loud and blowhardy science type people, and another thing you'll notice about some of these folks is they also happen to have a pretty good resume on like their physique or their accomplishments in the sport or fitness in general. So it's kind of a little bit of both. So I think they subvert the mainstream fitness audience and maybe for the first time plant the seed of science.
Sure.
Which is something that, well, like obviously their content directly won't really improve your critical thinking, but them making you aware of even of its existence in that space where people aren't even thinking about it in the first place might be, I think, is probably better than coming across the guy who's just selling you like, I don't know, some random workout or some supplement that doesn't work at all, that has, no science to support it.
No, Eric, I think that's incredibly fair. You know me. First, when the question is posed, I'm like, all right, who's like truly a piece of shit that like there's no forgiveness for, like I don't even have to think about. And then it's like, all right, now we're talking about the gray area here, which is definitely more complex. I would agree with you. I think so. First off, we also have to agree with the notion that not everyone that enters this space is actually trying to develop critical thinking skills. Like the average length of time that someone spends inside the fitness space is probably a handful of years. You're probably in your 20s when you start. You might make it into your 30s. There's a large swath, I'd say like 70, 80%. It's kind of here today, gone later today. And I think if they could be imparted, maybe the value here is a secondary effect of some of these more boisterous, louder, evidence-based practitioners, that if they're kind of teaching the mainstream, let's say, and we're defining then mainstream as people that are probably not as interested in critical thinking, their goals, they're interested in that said outcome of what they want to achieve, and they just want to make sure they're doing the right thing. So they want to make sure they're achieving the goal as fast as possible, which is fair. Like I don't think there's any reason to dog someone for that. But I will say, I think as a unexpected consequence, and I could make a joke about capitalism here, where like it uses our inherent greed sometimes for the greater collective good. We're not trying to do good things, but as a result of that, as a result of the commerce and everything else, like some of the things happen where we have more. Yeah, competition, more economic resources that then equal the public good, like roads and other things. It's not like someone started to be like a oil baron. It's like the children need to be fed. It's an unintended consequence,
Children need to work in my factory.
Yeah, and for them to work, they need to be fed. So it's like, all right, unintended. And in the same, but in the same way, I think one of the things I can appreciate, and I think certainly you could see that, you're the hardcore dude that's like, all right, we got to get this right. And then people are out there preaching. The net effect that happens, and that's why you could argue definitely they're net positive, is that some of the things that used to be cultural norms have shifted. They don't know why, because they are platitudes, they're truisms. So let's say flexible dieting. You ask the average bro these days, they're probably following some not to a T, and they couldn't accurately define it, like many other like problems with it, but their core nutritional values have seismically shifted over the last decade. The same idea, I'd say, Eric, with the average trainee, how they approach lifting, they might not know why. Like, I think basically more people, more natural lifters are now squatting, benching, and deadlifting. And they're training probably more intelligently than a decade ago. They don't know the reasons why, but it's because a large enough slice of the community made it the new accepted cultural norm that people are doing it. And then the people that try and question, like, okay, like I'm squatting, like, yeah, like, well, how do I get stronger? They go down that rabbit hole. They find stronger by science. So I think And I joked from the outset because it is true, one of those things. You don't need to like a person to either agree with their stances, but you can dislike their practices. And when you get into that conversation of net positive, which I joke with Jeff about all the time, it's one of those difficult ones where it's like, okay, this is what it really means. But in a very objective way of evaluating what are people learning from the meta community, I do think there's a positive impact. And I could see that from being now, 12 years in the space. I remember when, I was scorned, like someone was like, yeah, how can you, like, what are you doing? Like, berated for like deadlifting in like 2010 and making a video on it, right? By like the general fitness mainstream, you're going to snap your shit up, your back's going to explode. And now it's kind of, you see that I see bros all the time at like Fortis Join, and it's night and day, the difference. So I can attest to the fact that sometimes leading from the front and being a loud voice can have unintended positive consequences that can shift the overall conversation in a space.
And I think that's fair, man. And while you were talking, I was reflecting, and then we can get on to another question. Yep. I was reflecting on like your comment about like people aren't getting into fitness to think about critical thinking. Like that's potentially too much of a burden. They just want to know if they're doing the right thing. I think, unfortunately, in an industry where there are so many charlatans out there and there's a lot of incorrect information, probably the most important skill, if you want to make sure you're doing the right thing and not wasting your money and actually following something sensible, is a measure of critical thinking. But I think it's very difficult to sell critical thinking. But I think if you position it as street smarts or common sense, which is the same thing, let's be honest.
Yeah.
Like being able to call a spade, being able to tell that this wacky yelling guy who's just calling people out and is constantly controversial and is promoting things that he makes money from, like you would want that to set off your alarm bells versus someone else who their entire brand is based around, say, science and education, and it's kind of hard to find out they make money off of giving you science and education. Like there's no way for that to subvert their biases, right? If they want to sell science and education, that means they can't go out of line with the science and education community, right? It's a self-correcting thing. So I think, like, even though you might not understand anything about like biochemistry of a supplement that's being pushed, or proper evidence-based practice, like you haven't read the meta papers on papers, like the science of science, which is essentially what evidence-based practice is. If you have the street smarts, I'll say, to be able to tell, like, that kind of reminds me of the 3-card Monty guy, and that actually looks like maybe a public library where I do have to pay to get access to a card or for parking, but maybe that's worth it. I think that's a problem. So I do think people need to be able to differentiate between those voices and spot people who don't have their best interests at heart. And I think that's another problem with the person who sounds like that other guy or gal, but is pushing science. So that may be an unintended consequence for the influencer, but probably not. I mean, maybe the person. I mean, I guess there's other voices to hear. But yeah, if you get in the, like, what's the saying? Like if you roll around with pigs, you both get dirty, but they like it.
Yeah.
So I think that is something to consider more for the content creator. That if you want to go down the pathway of trying to get the most eyes on you, but keep your information sacrosanct, and you do that through some of those means which are not great, like controversy and just in calling people out and all that type of thing, like that could potentially blow back. That could degrade your credibility despite the fact that you're putting out good information. And also, I think it's just not necessary. Like if that's your message, like look at Jeff. Like it's not like Jeff is doing call out videos.
No,
So,
Eric, absolutely. No, that was Oakland Eric coming over. He said, like, street smarts. Like, let me tell you something here. I will.
Like, bro, like, don't walk down the street with money in your hand after you go to a grocery store. I learned that when I was like 8, the hard way. I'm not even kidding. Like, so, like, I just think that's kind of like, you need to know that when you get in the fitness industry, or you will be buying bullshit, and potentially getting hurt or following like a really restrictive diet.
Eric, it is one of those things that is amusing to me, where I think it's underrated. I like correctly how you phrased it as street smarts. That thinker who I really like, Nassim Taleb, calls it how to not be a sucker, like how to be a practitioner always first. And to your point, I think because we are all humans, like, wow, what a great statement, Omar. But I think there are, even if you're not analyzing the quality of the information, but you're looking at the quality of the person. And to your point, I think that's what you're talking about, the evidence-based people that are mimicking exactly the similar style. You could tell, like, in the way they're trying to convey their information, the tone of their voice and everything else, and what they tend to emphasize and how they try and frame it, even how they set up their content. If you're not trying to analyze the content itself, so break down, okay, like, what are they trying to say? Is this feasible? Does it make sense? Where are they saying this from? And all those other things. If at the very base level, it kind of makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up just a little bit, and it sounds bullshitty. And that's why, to your point, I don't think it's a bad thing then if you're evaluating social cues and signals and like all those other things, like those nonverbal commands, like kind of your intuition. You'll be turned off also probably by that evidence-based person who's using the similar tactics but saying the right information. But then you might come across someone else over time, like an Eric, where you're like, okay, well, let me listen to this. The free exchange of ideas. And I think there are a few. Let's end it here.
I love how I'm the archetype of just the perfect person in this. Anytime you open your mouth.
Look, the hunk. I got to give it up to you. I could give another reference. I could be like, oh, like a Zordos. But guess what? He's not on social. He doesn't exist. No one knows he exists. He's been on here 2 times.
Zordos has been on here way more than 2 times.
Yeah, actually, I got to put respect on my man's name.
Don't you dare.
Is it 3 times?
I think it's 4.
Damn. Okay, that is some disrespect. And I know he doesn't listen to it though, so I like it's fine. That's why I said it. Whereas like Ben, like when I say Ben Escrow, is like maybe he's like, Omar, I'm actually sad that you mentioned that, and then we would have to talk for 30 minutes because he is just that very in tune person. I will say, Eric, very quickly that speaking about that, one of the red flags, because I think there are numerous red flags, but I think for some of those charlatans, it's the unwillingness to have the free exchange of ideas. So if basically either you're deleting, blocking, censoring people, or someone not challenging, I'm not saying in like a controversial way, someone's like fuck you, I want to have a debate. But if you're not willing to test what you're saying out into the open source, like open society, other people to talk about that to me is a red flag. There's many other ones, but just that to me in the 21st century on social media is one of the biggest common red flags, that you're your own castle. And I could think of a certain strength coach out of Wichita Falls where it's like they will not entertain any opinion or any information outside of said castle because it betrays an inherent fragility to their position, I think.
Well, the trick is, Omar, is to just be so obsessive about making sure that nothing you say could even be slightly wrong according to the literature, and then couch it so much with mays, ands, or caveats that if anyone says anything, just post a link to an older video or a research article that is out there and advise them to check it out for themselves. That's another way to do it that I would recommend. I'd call it the Helms method. Yeah. And it just requires a lot of neuroticism and self-doubt. And then you can be another confident producer of information just like myself.
How we call that the Helms Deep method right there. Oh, you want to go down the rabbit hole? Here we go.
But it's not my method. I mean, I just thought
you're using an example,
and it may not work in all cases, Omar.
Right.
But if you want to learn more about it, you can definitely check out some of my prior content.
Eric, so I will say this because I am aware of the listeners' time. Where wow, we did that and it was so free flowing, and we didn't have a sponsor to shout out. We've been talking now for an hour officially during this episode. But we're going to do one better, right? Because we're not going to shout out that app. Instead, what we're going to do is take that precious time of yours. You're probably commuting or training or doing who knows what. Good work out there. We'll answer one more question because, Eric, these have been fire. The TikTok Nation.
You can't do a Q&A with just 2 questions. Then it's just basically I mean, I guess it's technically plural, but I feel like we need that third one.
Yeah. 3's a party, okay? 2's a tango, 3's a party.
That's right.
And so this one here, we had Tommy, Tanya, and now Tyrone, but we're talking here today about periodization. So we're talking about periodization and the concept as related to, it seems, athletic performance. So I must say that TikTok in general, we might do all future Q&As from TikTok because this is once again challenging our maybe biased assumptions. Where I said, Eric, hey,
it's where the thinkers are. I did not know this.
Yeah,
it's just all expressive dance.
Yeah. Hey, but Eric, you are a dancer, so is that by happenstance, you think that you're a great dancer and also a great thinker? Like, just think about it. We shouldn't have been so hasty to judge, is all I'm saying.
Maybe correlation is causation.
Hey, now we're getting somewhere. So the question, and I'll summarize it because it is a paragraph here that I wrote down. It's related to athletic performance, but let's talk periodization. It always seems to be the discussion surrounding volume and intensity. And I often see, on the other hand, when it comes to athletic performance, so they're talking in the context of strength sports, but when it comes to athletic performance in sports, I often see periodizing exercises, on the other hand, as the main focus, and specificity would come in making the movements more similar to the sport. So you could use an example like a weighted bat swing, or maybe some sort of jump if your sport has a jump that's required that mimics the said sport itself. So special exercises for track and field, so on and so forth. Where is the line between strength and conditioning and then practicing your sport?
This is actually a really interesting question. And I think the primary thing, to not bury the lead, that I want to get across to the listener is that when you're sitting in the I have a PhD in strength conditioning, but let's be honest, like that conditioning means like bodybuilding conditioning.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, it's like I have a PhD in strength, and I'm a strength coach much more than I'm a strength conditioning coach. Yeah, I could pass my CSCS exam, and I understand general concepts of speed, agility, and quickness, and things that are outside of that domain. But I am, like many of our listeners, embedded in the world of strength and physique sport, right? Or thinking, or fitness, or that corner. And I think when you're in this corner, you have a general idea of what makes sense and what doesn't. Like you said, Omar, in your last question answer, you may not know why, but you know what the general zeitgeist is. And if you're an Iron Culture listener, maybe you actually know a fair amount more than that and some whys behind it. But you also said that expertise is domain specific. And I think if I was to speak to anyone else who is an expert in any topic, I think if you were a true expert, here's the one thing you know for sure, regardless of topic. There's almost an endless level of depth that you can analyze a given topic. I have looked so deep into the science of physique and strength sport to the point that it is not helpful to the average lifter. That it is, it has been decades of work to, give summaries that can be put in an hour-long podcast that pretty much covers everything that matters, right? So that just goes to show you the inefficiency of expertise. But it's still the necessity to get that kind of level depth. And more importantly, I like that shit. So any expert knows that they can go endlessly deep on a topic, and that going too superficial on a topic reduces the actual fidelity of the accuracy on that topic. And if that's true of making sushi, of history, of strength sport, of engineering, and of extraterrestrial biology, once we actually do that field, then we know it's true of any field. So if you're an expert and you're a learned person, and you know that's true of your area, and you decide to step laterally and try to evaluate something, the only error I really don't want you to make is to, for some reason, think that level of depth is not there. And the way you avoid that is just to approach that with humility. So, even though I have a PhD in strength conditioning with lowercase on that C, when I see, let's say, a track and field strength conditioning specialist, or when I see a rugby S&C coach doing something that doesn't make sense to me, you might think I'd be well within my right to be like, idiot, but I don't. I actually don't. I don't allow myself to make a judgment because I don't have enough data to make that judgment. Yet I can't tell you how many times I see people who, in my estimation, within my own domain, are knowledged, but not to the same degree of expertise that I have on strength and physique sport, and they are talking shit about that person. Mm-hmm. I think that's who you don't want to be. That said, sometimes they just do some wacky shit and they're not actually experts in their field. But it's difficult to know, which is the point. So anyway, with that said, I can speak to generalities on this, Omar, and I can help people understand some fundamental concepts in motor learning, like the principles of motor learning that I think will help people understand, at least understand the continuum that we're operating on, maybe not where to be on it, which will be very sports specific, and help them understand the difference between periodization in the context of a true athlete versus a strength or physique athlete. So one, let's introduce the concept of closed and open sports skills. All right. Pretty easy one if you think about it. A closed skill is always repeated in the same manner. Like, let's say a high jump, you know? I mean, it's not always the same manner. The jump moves up, but there's no one trying to block you. The environment doesn't change, right? There's no opponent. You don't have to react. It's a kind world problem, if you will. So that is the same thing as powerlifting, weightlifting, or just, hypertrophy, which is really just training to get bigger. You don't necessarily know everything that goes into it, but it's always the same. There's no open, and there's no change in environment, change of course. Like, let's say if you're an ultra endurance athlete, that course that might be the same distance as that one is not actually the same. There's subtle differences. If you're a mountain climber, no two mountains are the same, right? So there are various examples you can give where you have, open sports or open sport skills, but even within them, you have more closed or open versions. So for example, in basketball, shooting a three-pointer, it's going to dictate how did you get in the position to get that three-point shot? Did you get a pass? Was it a steal? Okay, is that three-pointer with the defender in front of you, so you have to do, a higher jump or a fadeaway? Or is there no defender near you? Are you wide open? Are you at the last minute of the clock, right? Are there fans behind it trying to mess it up? Or is it, during a COVID shutdown, so where no one's actually attending the game and it's just shooting normally, right? Those are all changes to a three-point shot. But now let's talk about the free throw. The free throw, always the same position. There's no defender. So you remove that. That's a much more closed version of a very, very, very similar skill, though, right? So this is a continuum. So for that reason, some of the same motor learning principles might be applied differently when we're thinking about how do I get better at, say, squatting versus how do I get better at making a cut in a team sport game. Okay, because one is reactive and planning, and maybe you have to go left, maybe you have to go right. But a squat's always a squat. It's either going to have a heavier load or a lighter load. So there's what's called the principle of varied practice, which I think is what creates the most confusion in motor learning principles, because it basically says, and there's empirical data to support this, that training a skill in different environments and with different challenges makes you better at it than if you were just to try to always train it in the same monotonous way. And that makes sense because our brains learn motor patterns in a like a naturalistic state in an ever-changing environment. We learn to walk on carpet versus holding something versus a hill versus whatever. So when we can have the same basic motor pattern that is challenged by different variables, we can kind of create quote unquote like deeper grooves in that motor pattern that are resilient and flexible to changes in our environment and changes in our system, like when I'm tired or fatigued or growing an inch every couple months or whatever, like if I'm a young kid. So having varied practice is a principle of motor learning, and it's something that you should apply. But there's also the principle of specificity. So people struggle with these two concepts, which are important, because the principle of specificity states that there's poor skill transference. And that's just the reality of things. Like a leg press is not going to help your squat that much. And even more generally, climbing a tree probably won't help you climb a rock wall that well. It might help better than swimming, but again, it's actually pretty dissimilar when you think about it. So it's hard to know where do things lie on this continuum, and how do you both leverage specificity and varied practice? And this is where there's mostly arbitrary lines in the sand, in my opinion, and it's heavily dependent upon the skill level of the learner, where they're at on their development as an athlete. Like if you look at long-term athlete development in team sports, they start with very general skills focused on fun. It's not really like training yet or challenging. And there's, good theory to believe that that's not only good for long-term adherence and enjoyment of sport, but makes them better athletes longer term, and they don't peak too early. So getting these kind of quote unquote basic motor skills that are durable to various environmental and organism changes will help you do those specific skills later on, as theory would say. And I think that there's strong reason to support that. But that exists on a different part of the continuum than if you wanted to start being a power lifter, right? Like you're starting to violate the principle of specificity too much by leveraging varied practice too far. Like for example, I was having a conversation with Bryce about this, and I was like, you could argue that a push-up is very specific to a bench press, right? But I personally don't think about a push-up at all when I'm bench pressing. Like I'm supporting my body in a plank position, I'm looking at the floor, and my body's moving through space.
Yeah.
For me, that feels entirely different than laying down on my back, arching, having to unrack a barbell, and then like tucking and bringing it down and then pressing it back up. It just feels completely different. And I've never, in all of my time as a powerlifter, maybe this is why I'm not a good bencher, have I thought of like, what is it like to do a push-up? Also, like when you think about push-ups, and I did a lot of push-ups in the military back in the day when I was in the Air Force, you're doing push-ups with the expectation of that you're going to go to fatigue. You have to think about pacing. You think about holding your body in a certain position. You're breathing through it. Like you don't hold your breath on any part of a push-up, right? Your scapula can move freely through space, right? So it's very different than that bench press where you're laying on your back. So that's just one example where something that at face value seems super specific maybe isn't. And it's difficult to know, well, how do I actually know if this is similar enough? So I don't envy strength and conditioning coaches for other sports where it is not that very, very obvious thing. Like, dude, there is no strength conditioning for powerlifting and then powerlifting coaches. There's just powerlifting coaches because they're one and the same. But there are potentially a strength conditioning coach for soccer and then the soccer coach. And they're going to have them do things that you would argue are like general speed, agility, quickness drills. And then the S&C coach might be expected to also develop their speed, agility, and quickness. So where's the line in the sand between what I do and what you do? And more importantly, for the things that are really similar, wouldn't it just be better just to play the sport more? In some contexts, yes. In some contexts, no. So this is actually, I think, a very difficult conversation to have, and you will see there's a lot of disagreements within the sport, like the sport strength and conditioning coaches. Some of them lean far more on the kind of basic NSCA style. Let's build the engine, and I'm not worried about the skills. That's the sport coach's thing. I'm going to make you strong, powerful, fast, and I'm going to give you the underlying characteristics and adaptations that support your sport. Like I'm not going to worry about getting a soccer player a 3 times body weight squat. But maybe I am going to improve, like his 1RM early on, and then I'm going to move to ballistic jump squats or something like that. Or maybe I'll do single leg stuff, or I'll train in a different plane of movement. I want to get his lateral lunge stronger. So I think generally where my philosophy lies, as someone who's done next to no team sport S&C work, is that you need to do a needs analysis of the sport in terms of like which energy systems, which planes of movement, which muscle groups, and what types of, I think I covered that in energy systems, and then in what types of velocities and joint angles are used in sport, and make sure that you support that, but with arguably non-specific training to get there. And even contraction modes, like for example, like a scrum, like you need to actually develop isometric strength in those joint positions. Versus dynamic or eccentric strength, like braking forces, things like that, or reactive or absorptive forces. So like you need to think about all that stuff and then focus on those adaptations, and then let the proper motor learning be in the domain of the coach. But I'm not confident in that position because I do see some pretty high level S&Cs who cross that boundary, and they start having some really like what I would describe as like special skills, if you are like, Bondarchuk or something like that, where they've isolated a specific portion of a movement in the sport that happens a lot, and they will like load it or try to increase load on it in some way, not necessarily through adding weight, but maybe increasing velocity or what have you. So that's kind of to answer the sport specific side of it. Good question. I don't know much more to juggle, but those are my general thoughts. I think it's a little easier to kind of go back to the strength and physique and sport world and start to notice where things don't really make sense. So like you can definitely take varied practice too far. And you can also take specificity too far. If you're just doing like daily 1RM training, you will get stronger, but there's a question of sustainability. and there's a question of actually maximizing your long-term capacity because of the opportunity cost of not being able to develop more like general hypertrophy. And that might take so much out of other things. You're not just squatting, you're also benching and deadlifting, etc. So yeah, it's a complex thing. I don't know if I answered that question, Omar, or if I just simply created more questions. But I think it's important when we want to talk about such a broad concept to just know what are all the things we're actually talking about and lay them on the table.
No, Eric, I think what you did a very good job of. There are a lot of, let's say, maybe aspiring strength coaches that probably think that their expertise is far outside of their current boundaries. And I think you did a phenomenal job of outlining some of the very initial considerations that a real S&C would need for whatever capacity we're talking about, whatever sport that they might be partaking in, that they might be coaching. And then you immediately see, oh, there's a lot of considerations here. And I think, Eric, that maybe it is something that we could explore in a future episode with said S&C coaches, because you are an expert. And as you said, an expert can identify within another expert. It's like, okay, maybe I don't know all these things, but enough in order to bring someone who is qualified to speak on this topic. And I think that's at the inception of Iron Culture what we've always aspired to do. And it is funny how you see within our space, because the initial thing you said, I agree wholeheartedly, about potentially people like how they'll meme certain styles of training. It's just because you don't understand it doesn't mean that it doesn't make sense in some way. Like it might just be completely outside of your realm of expertise. And as you're explaining, just some of the considerations for a real S&C coach, it's like I've never thought about obviously these things, because guess what? I've never been in that position where it's like, oh, it's time to train a rugby team and like let's do this. And this isn't just once again. There would be like the cultural tradition. Let's say that's kind of like in powerlifting, where it's like you're going to do things. You don't know why you're going to do things, but you're going to do them because that's what people do. So we're going to do sets of 5. We're going to do this or what have you. And there are S&C coaches like that. And then it's like, let's take a real evaluation of the sport and how can we maximize transference then for the player so that you give the best performance. And I think the kernel of what you're hinting at here, the value that's maybe tied, Eric, even to the initial question that you asked, is that you want to try and, be at your best. You want to see yourself being at the best. That even comes then to answering questions in this way. So I'm excited. I'm excited at the possibility, if you could think of some people to further elaborate on that topic, I'd be all the way in. And I do think you did more than enough just to point out that it's very complex. There's not an easy answer, but this is why it's complex, as opposed to just saying like, that's what we joked about, that episode on pain or whatnot. It's like, okay, how long do you have? We could spend 2 hours defining this. It's like, okay, no, we get it. Like, we get it. Like, but just give us, Eric, like a little bit of an idea of why it's complex. And I think you did a fantastic job with that. That's good to hear. Yeah. And I'll noodle on a good person to fit that bill. I think another way to think of it is, like we're aware of the cultural memes in powerlifting, like that are, you probably don't want to be, and because you don't really know why you're doing it, or you have a very superficial, easily like rip apartable explanation for why. Like if you go either end of the specificity like dogma continuum, you get untenable, training programs that people do, but they're untenable from like a justification standpoint as being optimal, right? Sure. Like if you're only doing purely like daily 1RM squatting and deadlifting and benching or something like that, or that's the only type of training you do, then you have to hold very, I would say, to be most charitable, you have to hold yet unproven and probably unlikely true conclusions about the role of hypertrophy for strength. You have to, given it is very difficult to actually gauge the cause of injuries, you have to be very optimistic that maybe there aren't any causes of injuries related to load or high frequency, high intensity training. And you have to assume that like the monotony data doesn't apply to strength. So you're taking risks and you're taking gambles on things that could potentially cost you by taking that approach. And then that's probably not ideal. And you're also making assumptions about the extremely poor transfer of any, accessory work. And basically saying, well, hey, if the opportunity cost of me doing close grip, of not be doing more bench, doesn't bench transfer better to bench than close grip? And that's a false, comparison, because you're not doing close grip bench press just to increase,
your one arm on bench press, you're doing close grip because you think it'll help you do something else that should eventually lead to that, that is less efficient by doing bench press itself. An easier example would be, would you do like grip training or more deadlifts, right? Like think about the deadlifting I'm doing now is not currently sufficient to make my grip good enough for me to hold lockout. And if I use straps, I can lift 40 pounds more.
Yeah.
The strict, specificity person will be like, well, you want to train your grip in the most specific way to deadlifting, and that's deadlifting. And it's like, okay, but now I'm actually getting injured and weaker because I'm deadlifting too much to make my grip better when I could potentially just train my grip. So like there is a point where I can make an accurate straw man argument to where that slippery slope becomes obvious, and you can be like, oh, okay, so ultra specificity doesn't make sense. On the flip side of it, someone who is like all about varied practice and they are doing almost random variations in exercise, now they're getting away from specificity and they're doing things like they don't actually know if it has transfer, and they are losing the opportunity cost of just doing the main lift. Like you're doing all this time doing like push-ups, like, all right, it's like a different rep range. Are you going to load it? Or let's take something more reasonable. Let's take like the West Side versions where you're essentially changing the main lift version so often that you have to make random choices. Like I've talked to some of these folks who do it well, and that's great. I've talked to some other folks who follow them who don't do it well, and they can't tell you why they decided in the rotation they needed a reverse band bench press.
Yeah.
But how many variations on bench press are there? And you need to have, like, if you're changing every 2 weeks, and you need to have variations, so you're not going back to the same thing like every 4 weeks, then you're going to have like 8 rotations on this thing. So a lot of these are arbitrary. They're random variations on the main movement. And you have to wonder, like, yeah, you could justify that with varied practice, but is it actually a variation on the main lift? Like, does your body really recognize that movement as the same exercise? Like, there's been a lot of, sumo deadlifters and conventional deadlifters who will talk about the transfer teams that only go one way. Right? Like my sumo doesn't really help my conventional helps and that's not ubiquitous, don't get me wrong, but I've heard that a lot. And if you're just an average person who's not involved in powerlifting, you look at those two movements and be like, yeah, they should definitely transfer to one another. So I do think it's a really good idea to use variations on the main lifts, but I think they need to be purposeful. So I'll give you an example. If you're someone who loses position coming out of the hole of a squat, a pause squat probably makes sense to really challenge you in that bottom position, and also just to give you the time to notice changes in your body while you're down there by spending more time there, right? If someone watches you from the side on your deadlift and it creeps out in front of you and it throws you out of position, doing a mid-shin pause so you can feel contact and again have the time to actually expand your radar to notice these changes in your body position, that might actually help you fix that motor error in the long run. And that's a variation that might make sense. And that happens a lot with sumo deadlifters. And that's something I've seen a lot of success with, having sumo pullers do mid-shin pauses at certain times when I see the problem, not just I'll throw it in there. Now, if you write a general program for everybody, like a 5-3-1 or even my examples in my book, maybe you do throw these variations in and you just go, okay, these are going to be good for most lifters at some point in their development. I guess that's acceptable because a lot of us just start lifting with templates. But I think generally, yeah, you want varied practice, but even better than varied practice is individualized, targeted varied practice. And that's what it should be built around rather than just random variation in practice.
Eric, that makes
for closed skills. That's my caveat. Yeah.
Eric, I mean, that makes a ton of sense, but how would you respond to that person that would say, sure, you said that about West Side, but we have 100 world record holders that have squatted over 800 pounds. Like, results don't lie.
I would just go on open powerlifting and show them like IPF worlds from the last 15 years where they haven't been relevant. So,
you mean your events that you were your own judges at, that you judge then like the depth and everything and the validity of the actual movements being performed. So you're the one having your own athletes compete at your own event and you're having your own people judge.
So you start your own federation.
Yeah.
And then when you're not lifting, you actually judge your own athletes who go to your gym.
Yep.
You pass those squats.
Of course.
You create equipment to help with the way that you want it to be performed, and then you can also claim your own success. But yeah, so it's a win-win-win-win-win. Circular winning.
Yeah. There's so much to be said. But much like flexible diet, Eric, all I'll say is that I am happy at the current state of powerlifting and strength sports and what is being disseminated and the generally accepted truths versus a decade ago. Because guess what, your boy followed once again one of those a west side, and I'm not trying to
I did too.
insult, but
and I made gains with it too.
Yeah, no, at the time, there was one thing that had helped, and then I told you I followed. Like at the time, I was the most dedicated phase of my training career. It was 16 weeks for the squat, and this is a West Side certified person. And I'm not saying this is me. Let's be clear. I'm saying this is my personal anecdotal experience. I'm not saying that the methodology doesn't work. I'm just saying that when you talked about individualizing for the person and doing like an analysis, intake, this was just a one size fits all. Like this is what works. It's like then I'm just gonna follow. So I'm following the template. But from that position to then what we know now and what are the essential skills or qualities people need to work on in order to get stronger, as opposed to like this is the program. What are the qualities we're training? It's like, well, we're doing max effort. It's like, okay, like why are we're doing a variation every 2. I'm like, fair enough. And it's like, what are we doing here? And we're doing the belt squat because the belt squat, like we had a belt squat in there, Eric, and they built the belt squat, the width as an example, is wide like a multiply squatter would squat. So it's specific enough for a multiply squatter, but as a raw squatter who was a close stance squatter at the time, it's terrible. Like imagine basically doing a sumo squat, right? And that's like your secondary, most common accessory movement. And you're like, this is for sure going to train. Like you just immediately start seeing some of those
you're not even a sumo puller too. You're a conventional puller. So that would have accidentally helped the lift you weren't trying to help, but it didn't.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And that's one small example where people, once again, they're following systems without understanding the methodology. So I am just grateful overall. And let me get back to them hucksters, Eric, the evidence-based folks that are using shoddy marketing in order to convey the point. Overall, I think the industry is definitely better off because even if people follow only those at the top are doing much more things right than wrong. Like first, like I remember that the six
you can't get away with as much these days. You're right.
Yeah. Yeah, and people are called out, and we could talk about culture in general within the fitness space, where it's kind of like I'm right, and this is the reason why, and the intent behind it. But again, net effect. I'm gonna pause it. This is a positive podcast episode. Feeling good. Let's just keep that attitude. Let's not have this cynicism creep in. So phenomenal, Eric.
I'm with you, man. I think we did a good job answering that one.
Yep. No, the 3 T's, so TNT and T. Just dynamite, as AC/DC would say. That is all the time though, because we went over the hour. It's an hour and a half. Okay, it's like any average movie length time. Hour 20 on the very low side. 2 hours might go over. We've done hypertrophy roundtables, 2.5 hours, which is we're now going more to an epic.
Omar, honestly, if you're a podcast trying to constrain yourself to an hour, you're pretty much constraining yourself to be a bad podcast. I'm just going to say that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just an absolute truth when you think about it, because you're thinking, okay, I need to shill out this product as many times as possible. How can I do that without it being emotionally, mentally draining, really not impact the quality of my life in any way, shape, or form? But how can I get the most amount of clicks in order, once again, to circumvent the system and make that their dollar bills? And it's so it's easy to do. I'm pretty sure also that there's not even a live recording done. I think they just do it for the year, all within. They have Macro Factor guy chained. You notice how you can't see their ankles. And for a 52-hour period, because it's 52 episodes in a row, 1 hour each, they just bang it out. And then that's it for the year.
You put in your 2.5 days and you're good. No big deal.
Yeah, some people would just call that efficiency, Eric. Like, who am I?
Hey, that's just applying some of the principles of the Ford model to podcasting. I got no issue with that, man.
Man, Eric, this is an excellent episode. I will wrap it up there. I'll say thank you so much, as always, for being on. Look out, potentially, folks, for that episode on Real S&C. There's a lot of different episodes also coming up. I'll hint and say there might be unification going on again, okay? A reuniting of cosmic forces that might result in a world tour that would only be at one stop. But that's all you need, in my opinion. When it's that good, the performance, right? It's like the Super Bowl halftime show. Is anyone upset that there's only one performance, right? Like one stop in that? No, because it is the be all end all. So Masculinity in Crisis, stay tuned. There'll be an announcement. You can go ahead right now, though, and you could try and, appeal to the pyramid by leaving a rating and review on iTunes. We are ranking there. I told Eric, he saw the vitamin D episode, that we cracked that top 100 once again. 5 stars, is the most popular rating, I'll just say, and let you make your own judgment from there in terms of what you should do. And we're back every single Monday. We'll catch you in that next episode.